Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Doctors of Running podcast, where we, a group of doctors of physical therapy, discuss the art and science of running and the stuff that we put on our feet. Today, I'm the solo Doctors of Running representative. I'll be hosting today. I'm Nathan Brown. And the reason why I'm the only one here is not because I'm giving you a solo podcast. That would be painful for you all if we had to do that. But I actually have an amazing guest with us, another doctor of physical therapy, Victoria Sekely. She is here with us to talk all things strength training and running. We've pooled your questions and we're excited to dive into those and hear a lot more from her expertise and what she has to say. So Victoria, thank you so much for joining us on the podcast today.
Thank you. I'm so happy to be here and it's my favorite topic. So lots to talk about today.
Awesome. So just a quick bio that I'm going to read off for you, and you can learn more about her on her Instagram handle, Train Smart, Run Strong. She also has a website, but Victoria is a physical therapist, run coach, and strength coach who's passionate about working with runners and using her skills to assist runners who are rehabbing from injury or looking to become a stronger and more efficient runner. I think that does sum it up for what I know about you so far. But can you give us a little bit of background of how you got to where you are, maybe your educational background, and kind of your career trajectory to where you're at now?
Absolutely. I mean, we could start all the way back, but I'll spare you the minute details. So first of all, I guess the first thing to say about me is I am actually Canadian. So I come from across the border. And the reason I came to the States is actually because I played tennis in college. So that's what brought me over here. And the physical therapy profession in Canada is a little bit different, I would say. Number one is in everywhere else in the world, we're called physios. So not that that's a huge difference, but I always find that really interesting and forget that when I go back home. But I always, playing in sports, I was always really interested in kind of injuries and having my own fair share of injuries while playing in college really kind of led me down that path without me even really knowing. And once I graduated college, physical therapy just seemed like a really perfect fit. I wanted to stick in kind of the sports world and also get a deeper sense of connecting with people and understanding why injuries happen and helping them get through that. So that's really what brought me to physical therapy school. I went to NYU, which brought me up to New York and thankfully close to the border, close to home still. So it was a good choice for me, I'd say, because I'm very, still really close with my family. And I was always a runner from day one. And it really came from my mom, who ran her first half marathon when I was much younger. And I decided to do one with her, actually, when I was 12, which everyone thought my parents were crazy when they had to do that. But I had one of the best experiences of my whole life. And I will never forget crossing that finish line in Toronto, which was the Toronto Waterfront Marathon and half marathon. And ever since then, running kind of became like my thing. As soon as I put down the tennis racket, I was like, running is my true love. Tennis was, lots of love and lots of hate, especially going into a sport at a very young age. So running was always something that I felt a lot of passion towards. So once I graduated PT school and started working as a PT, my eyes would light up every time I worked with a runner. And I was just always so excited whenever runners would come into the clinic. I worked in Manhattan, very close to Central Park. So we did get quite a lot of runners coming through the door. And I, 2 years into me working, I was kind of at this point where I was like, do I really love what I'm doing, or what makes me love this? And I went and spoke to my boss, so I give a lot of credit to her, because I told her, I really love working with runners. And she said, hey, how about you become like the running person in our clinic? And I said, oh my goodness, that's actually something that brings me joy and really allows me to continue to be excited. As you know, in kind of the outpatient orthopedic world, you can see 20, 25 people a day, and it can be really grueling, but that was something that was really exciting to me. So I went out, I took every CEU, every course, every running, anything running I could find. I was just kind of like putting all of my effort and energy into it. And I told the front desk there, I said, if there's person who calls in their runner, please put them on my schedule. I was really excited about all this. And then the pandemic hit a couple of years after that. And I was in a really weird place still, not really knowing if I wanted to stay in outpatient orthopedics. And that's when I started my coaching business, my run coaching business, because I got the run coaching certification. And I just really loved that aspect of, taking people from a place of rehab and then moving them forward into training and racing again. And I feel like there's a huge divide in the healthcare industry. It's like PTs can very easily get you to a point where maybe you're just starting to run again, but with insurance and things get really complicated at that point. I feel like there's very little guidance after that, and not many people know how to get started again and to get back into, half marathon training. And I felt like there was a big divide there. So that's really what I based a lot of my coaching on in the beginning. And I think that's what really led me to the business that I have today. So yeah.
I don't want to interrupt you too much, but I was just talking to a friend who asked me, like, so what is the because I do some coaching in ours as well. And it's, what does the coaching side from a PT standpoint, like, what is that? How do you interact with that? What do you think about that?
Yeah.
I was like, it's actually my favorite part, because when you have somebody who you're doing coaching with, you get to look at like the entire pie that makes up a healthy runner. Whereas sometimes when you are with an insurance company or doing a certain type of therapy, you don't get to address everything else. So I just, like you said, that coaching side just opens up a lot to be able to care for somebody well. So
I completely agree. And I think there's a lot of just like injury management that can be done before it even becomes an injury. And a lot of that can happen through coaching. So a lot of the clients that work with me, if something pops up, I already know how to manage their plan because just having an understanding of injuries, and we can avoid a lot of the overuse injuries that happen in running from the get-go. And I think that's missing a lot in the healthcare field too. So, I really started this almost as like, I feel like physical therapy and the healthcare industry as a whole just kind of has to move forward with that too. Like we really need to step into that preventative phase. And unfortunately, the place that we're at right now with insurance companies, they're just not really letting us, treat in that way. But, obviously, we can make it work through coaching a lot of the time. So it's like kind of just attempting to move us forward and see what we can do and hopefully prevent a lot of the injuries that runners have to deal with. So
yeah, absolutely. You said you've taken a lot of running related courses and online stuff. Are there any for maybe other PTs that are listening, any that you really loved that stick out to you?
Yes. The one that sticks out to me mainly is Science in Sport, I believe it was called. I might be making that up. It was three PTs, Brian Kirschenbaum, I believe, Irene Davis, who is huge in the running field, and just like she does a lot of research, and one more who his name is slipping me right now. But the three of them basically brought like three different theories behind running injuries and kind of like debated each other all weekend. And
was this an in-person one?
It was before the pandemic.
So that would have been.
I think they still have it though.
Chris Powers, Heiderscheit, and Irene Davis. Yes, Chris Powers.
I probably mispronounced. Yeah, Heiderscheit.
That's great.
Chris Powers is the other one. Yeah.
I forget what they call it. It might be called like the Running Summit or something like that, or Science in Sport.
Why do I say Science in Sport? I don't even know where that came from. But yes, it was amazing. I think they still do it because I think I still get the emails from them. But I loved that one. I thought that was really interesting.
Yes.
And then honestly, like I really recommend, I know that I don't think we get CEUs from this, but I recommend PTs who are interested in running to take the RRCA run coaching course. I found that really informative just from like an understanding of how to manage plans and what runners might be going through in terms of like training and everything. Outside of that, there are some not so great ones too that I've taken. Oh, there was another really good one. I can't remember his name, but it was run by St. Augustine, and it was a fully like running coach, and he has a full running clinic down in Florida.
Awesome.
I don't remember his name though, but that was a great one as well.
Great.
Yeah.
There's a lot of good resources out there, and that running summit or whatever they call it. But Brian Heiderscheit, Irene Davis, and Chris Powers, they think differently about it, and I think that's what's fascinating. And
that was the best part.
Yes. Yeah. For them, they like kind of talk past each other. But as the clinician, you get to integrate it all because you don't have any stock in the game when it comes to the research. So it's pretty awesome. Cool.
Yeah. I hope I was helpful because I don't I have such a bad memory with that. I'm like, the St. Augustine. And it's like,
that's great. Well, people can find it. They'll figure it out.
Yeah.
So the topic of the day is going to be strength training for runners. We gathered a lot of people's questions, and we're going to list a lot of those here today. Our subjective of the day, if you have another question regarding strength training, you can put that there. Otherwise, our subjective is, what are your favorite tips to get your strength training in the midst of a training cycle? So feel free to comment with those below or send us an email with your thoughts. I'm happy to add any questions, like I said, that you may have to our list for future Q&A episodes or mailbag episodes as well. So let's get this started. Our first question is from IP Standard, and they're asking, do I need to lift heavy or is body weight enough?
I love this question. You don't need to do anything that you don't want to do. Let's start there because I think that, I think that's really what a lot of runners look at strength training and they're like, this really does not sound fun, does not sound interesting to me. And I understand that perspective. So I think finding any type of movement that you enjoy is better than nothing. So if you're at that point where you're like, I really don't think I'm ever going to do much of anything. I know strength training can be important, but like I get lost in the weeds when it comes to what exercise to do, how much weight to use, all of that stuff. Find some type of movement that you enjoy. Do it consistently, and that's better than nothing. So it's like, what's better than the other? Who knows? But at the same time, when we kind of get into the weeds of it, generally when we're talking about strength training purely, like how we're actually going to make a change in our muscular system, body weight can only take us so far. Right. So obviously body weight is a great place to start, especially if you're just starting out with any type of strength training protocol. You don't want to reach for a barbell the first time you're ever doing a squat. Starting out body weight and getting yourself comfortable with different types of exercises is always the place to start, and just getting yourself in that routine right off the bat. Now, in terms of lifting heavy, I do think that does have benefits for runners. Generally, when we're talking about strength training for running, the reason that we do it is because we want to allow our body to handle more load so that it can basically run more efficiently and we can tolerate more when we're running. So for that reason, adding weight and therefore lifting heavier can be beneficial because that's how we start to make changes in our muscular system. But it's a hard question because like what's one better than the other? It depends for many reasons. But if you are a runner who is interested in strength training and wants to actually make changes in their muscular system, you are probably going to have to add weight to the exercises that you're doing. And then if we're talking about like what is truly lifting heavy, and it's going to depend on the level that you're at. But if we're talking, barbell and really squat rack and what people I think kind of think of when they think of lifting heavy, I do think it can be beneficial, but you don't have to do it in order to make changes.
Right. Yeah. And you're talking about the muscular system here too. Do you think that there are people with certain injury history, whether if it's with certain muscle tendon issues or bone issues, that like lifting heavy may be beneficial for more so than others?
Yes and no, 100%. I think anyone with any kind of musculotendinous injury will benefit again from progressively strength training. Obviously you want to do it in a setting where if you're currently injured or have been chronically injured, in a setting where you are adequately monitored. That's where PTs come in, right? You don't just want to be like, well, my Achilles tendon hurts, I'm going to go and do calf raises with a 100-pound bar on my back, like from now until the end of time. Obviously you want to do it in a way that feels good and progresses nicely. But I do think that making changes to the musculotendinous system does happen as we lift heavier weights, and therefore can be very beneficial for someone who has dealt with that type of injury. I would even go to say someone who has dealt with any type of like bone stress injury, just to make that area a little bit more available to more load as well.
Right. Totally.
Yeah.
And one of the things you said right off the bat was like, you don't have to do anything you don't want to do, because it matters more that you actually do something. And I thought that was a poignant point, because I think there was a study that came out early this year that showed, we talked about on this podcast maybe a month or so ago, but basically the only people who people did have injury reduction through a strength training regimen, but the only people who did it were the high compliance people.
Yeah.
Anyone who was moderate or low, it had no benefit at all. So either you got to pick something you're going to do and stick to it, or it's not worth it at all. So I think that's a very poignant point that shouldn't get lost.
That's why I wanted to lead with that, because I do think that also allows some people to breathe a little bit too. It's like, okay, there isn't something specific that I have to walk through. It's not super complicated. Just, develop a routine, find what you like to do it consistently. And often we don't really have to think much past that. Obviously, as PTs, we know we can get a little bit more specific when it does come to certain injuries, when we're like, okay, maybe we want to start to assess how you're moving and where we can change different, again, musculotendinous issues. But for the average runner who is not injured, I really think that just finding something you enjoy in terms of strength training and doing that consistently, don't even think anything else other than that. Consistency is what matters most. Yeah.
That's great. Yeah. For runners who are wanting to lift heavy, maybe it's due to wanting to improve bone density or some kind of bone health thing. What are some big mistakes that you feel like people make when trying to add a ton of weight to their routine?
It's kind of the same as when, like, the mistakes that we make as runners, just doing too much too soon, right? Mm-hmm. So it's like sometimes you just want to be aware of how your body's feeling that day. I think we make this mistake a lot. It's like, it's hard sometimes to assess how your body's feeling. And then all of a sudden you're like, well, I lifted, 110 pounds last week. I'm going to try 120 pounds this week because I'm feeling good. And then all of a sudden, it was a little bit too much. And now you're hurting. That happens with running too. We're doing speed work one week, we do it again the next week, and that makes us injured. Something starts to hurt. So not doing too much too soon, I think, is really important, really nailing the basics of strength training as you're going through that. And I think just being mindful of, the reps and the sets that you're doing as well. I think some people feel like when they up the weight, they also have to be doing like 5 sets of 50 of like an exercise. And when you're lifting heavy, I don't think a lot of people realize, like, it really doesn't take, it can be 2 to 3 sets for 6 to 10 reps to make a difference. And as runners, we're not really used to that. We think that it's like, oh, endurance, we have to do 100 reps of this. And that's not really the most efficient way to lift heavy. So I think it's just being mindful of the load that you're adding on, easing into it, not having to rush through it. And then, the flip side of that is also leaving enough time for recovery for your muscular system afterwards. I think what a lot of runners do is they kind of expect their lifts to feel like they expect to feel like they do after a hard run. Mm-hmm. They expect to be sweating. They expect to be like huffing and puffing and like, all of that type of stuff. And that might not happen from strength training, especially if you're a runner with really good cardiovascular endurance. You might not even break much of a sweat if you're lifting heavy. And I think runners then will be like, well, I haven't done enough, so I'm just going to do 10 more exercises or 10 more sets of this. And it's like, don't keep those same expectations of how you're going to feel during a strength session as you are when you're running. They're different forms of movement. It's different types of activities. And I think runners sometimes are like looking for that kind of cardio feeling and end up doing too much with their strength because of that.
That's a really, really good point. And in that vein, when somebody maybe who So I'm guilty of like hating strength training. So sorry.
Me too. Me too.
Okay.
I'm the same way.
That's great.
Yeah.
So someone like me who is adding strengthening for the first time to my routine, do you usually recommend that they change their running routine as well, or do you say, oh, you're fine, just like add this, or do you modify both at the same time?
Great question and really good point. I do modify both because essentially you are adding load to your body, right? So generally it's either like maintenance status with running. So it's like you've gotten your running to a certain point and you're just going to kind of hold it there for a couple of weeks as you get accustomed to a new strength routine. In some cases, it might even be dipped down a little. It depends on the runner, what level you're at. And then also if you have a race on the calendar, like if you do have to, keep that in mind as well. So it depends. I think in a perfect world, if you could either maintain your running or even take it back just a little bit for a couple weeks until you get accustomed to it. Because again, like doing too much too soon can very much be you're adding a whole new strength routine and continuing to increase your running program. And then that's too much for your body to handle. So yeah, absolutely.
Cool. That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
So this kind of moves a little bit into our next question. This is from Amy McD 43. And they're asking kind of a question about when should I strength train? Is it best to do it on a speed work day? Is it best on an easy recovery day, a rest day? When do you work this stuff in and why?
As PTs, we're going to laugh at this, but the answer truly is it depends. I will give you a couple ideas for you to like really kind of start to think on your own. So, and really what works best for you, because ultimately that's what's going to be the answer, whatever works best for you. Generally, if you are, I tend to say if you're a beginner in strength training or running or both, I do like to strength train and run on separate days, especially if you're adding a whole new routine. So I would say, that doesn't really keep the hard days hard, but it's like you run on one day, you strength train on one day. That will just allow you to have a better sense of how your body's responding to each activity differently, right? So you're able to say, like, you're able to sleep on and be like, wow, I'm sore. Oh, that was probably from the run that I did, or that was probably from the strength training, and you get a better sense of how your body's responding to each. Now, if you've been doing that for a couple weeks, and obviously if you have a race on the calendar or your run training becomes a little bit more intense, like you have more days that you're running, I generally recommend pairing a hard run day with your strength training. Mm-hmm. And the reason being is because, again, the idea of recovery comes up. How does our body respond to hard run days? How does our body respond to true strength training? If we are doing both of those truly, our musculotendinous system is going to make changes. In order to allow for those changes to happen without crossing that threshold into injury, we need to allow time for recovery. And that's the whole idea between keeping the hard days hard, under the guise of the idea that the next day is easy, right? And I think sometimes people forget that next day has to be easy, and they end up doing a speed workout, a strength day, and then kind of like a moderately hard run, even though it technically should be an easy run. So I say, before you use that routine or that structure, make sure you're really, really good at keeping your easy runs easy. Like you are true to that before you start doing kind of doubling up those days, because that's honestly the best way to do it, is to keep that hard day hard. But that second day has to be easy in order to see those changes. Yeah, it has to actually be easy. Right. Which a lot of people are like, I don't even know how to do that yet. So working on that a little bit first, I think, is important too.
Do you have like preferences for yourself or for other runners on the order within that hard day, if that run should come before or after the workout or the lift?
I typically say, if you are looking at your calendar and you're like, okay, my goal is this marathon coming up in 2 months. That's my ultimate goal. I'm adding strength training into my routine, but my ultimate goal is a race on the calendar. I generally then will say you run before you strength train. And I believe there was some, don't quote me what article this was, there was some research that was done that says leave about 3 hours in between running and strength, just to, again, allow your body to do a little bit of recovery. So you're not going into that next activity completely fatigued. But that's the same idea. You want to kind of get the most important activity done before you do that second activity, because you don't want you don't want to be running on tired legs constantly. You want to be able to build that speed and build that endurance first, and then you can go into the strength training. On the flip side, if you don't have a race on your calendar and you're like, I want to explore how my body feels with strength, then I say start out with that strength training and then try the run later. Honestly, in practice, though, with most of my athletes, it's like we're not all professional runners. Like, none of my athletes are professional runners. So it's very much like a discussion that I have with them. Like, okay, well, what does your workday look like? And how can we make it work as best? And there are so many athletes I work with who really do have a goal race on the calendar. And they're like, look, I cannot get my run done in the morning. I have to do my strength training first. And I'm like, okay, nothing bad's going to happen, right? It's not like we're guaranteeing an injury if that happens. Absolutely not. So ultimately, think about what is going to work best for your schedule. If you are getting stressed out that I'm telling you have to flip it and it's not working for your schedule, please don't. Just like, it's not worth the stress and anxiety to overthink it. But if you have the availability and you're able to do it in that way, then great. You might see some performance benefits from that.
Yeah, that's huge.
Yeah.
I think a similar question we got from a number of people. I think a lot of people asked about this, but they were kind of asking, do you taper your strength training during the like running taper as well? And that could also be a broadened question to like, does lifting throughout the year change? Like, is there periodization of your lifting? Like right now, a lot of people are kind of in the beginning of their off season. Does that look different than like the middle of a marathon build? Like what's your take on kind of periodization of strength training?
I believe in periodization of every activity. I think that's the best way to keep our bodies injury free and for us to honestly like avoid burnout and feel our best when we're doing things in a certain season. I see our strength seasons as kind of opposite to running. So I'll give you, I think it's easiest said in an example. Let's say someone has a fall marathon on their calendar, and they want to add strength training and they're just starting out in the new year. I would take, 8 to 12 weeks to really work on strength training, heavy lifting, increasing the weight, and taking their time really building into those exercises. You can still absolutely be running through this, but running is not your priority. So that would be a time when you're strength training before the runs. Maybe you're not really increasing mileage, but you can still go out there and enjoy the runs as well. And then, you would do that into the marathon training program and things would flip a little bit. So then obviously you'd be building mileage, adding in speed work, all of that fun stuff through marathon training. And I call that kind of like maintenance level strength. So it depends on whatever level you built up to in that previous season. And you just kind of maintain it. And I love the way that I work with my athletes is strength really goes along with how the running season is. So we generally like to take cutback weeks or down weeks in your strength training as well too. And that'll answer the question of, yes, I also do taper my athletes with the strength training leading into a goal race. 100% I will taper their strength for sure. Yeah. And often even with some athletes who might feel overly fatigued going into a race, I'll cut out strength training completely just to save up their energy and make them feel better too. Yeah.
Yeah. It's all demands energy from us. And so
exactly.
That makes a lot of sense. Cool.
Exactly. Yes.
Great. All right. We have a lot of questions, so we'll see if we can keep rolling here. So this is from Sean Takura. They're asking, does strength training benefit every runner, or is it just something that really benefits the elite of us? I shouldn't say us.
Every runner.
I'm not.
Not me. Yes, it benefits every runner. I think there's a misconception that, we shouldn't be training how the elites are. I disagree. I think that if we all had the time to do that, like we would all love to train how the elites are training. Obviously if you are taking running seriously, but strength training has many benefits. I think from a PT perspective, what I think that a lot of us forget about is sometimes strength or not even, I guess a better word is just exercises, maybe not like strength training, but like using exercises as tools to build confidence, to really, again, like add load to an area where maybe you have previously been struggling with. Like strength training or exercises in that sense can be used for many different reasons. I also look at running drills as important for that reason too. So yeah, I think every one of us can benefit from it in some way or the other. Yeah.
And the benefits span a lot of different categories, from
Yes.
the ones we think about of just like injury prevention, but there's also just that variability of movement, variability of stress, changes
Exactly.
There's a lot going on in our heads too. It's really good.
That's a really good point, actually, and probably I should have led with this. That is the best part about strength training for a runner. It's not necessarily like, oh, I'm building load in my musculoskeletal system, which is really good, but our body likes to move in different ways. We unfortunately, running is really monotonous, and that's why the running community in general, we see a lot of bone stress injuries compared to other sports that maybe do a lot of like cutting in different directions. Like running is really the same type of load, kind of for 1,000 steps a mile for many miles on end. And strength training can be really beneficial just to add variability into your movement. And once we get a lot better at moving in different ranges, then we will become even better. Like, for example, if you're making a turn on a run and your foot accidentally hits the curb, you'll be much likely to handle that without getting injured if your body has moved in different positions like that before, right? So we're just becoming more resilient athletes in general, and doing things that our body likes to do, because running is like a lot of the same thing.
Yes, totally.
Yeah.
Something you referenced too was that it was kind of like a side comment where you said, well, maybe I shouldn't say strength training, I should say movements, because really when you get to like exercise physiology, strength training is such a specific, it's a specific like percentage of your max capacity of a certain movement. And so if you really want, so I think we throw around the term strength training a lot when really, you know, when you're doing high repetition, low weight, that's not strength training. It's muscular endurance training, technically. So super fascinating. But
I know, it's
this
like
brings
we
us...
kind of, should we change everything on social media for now? Anyways, I'm sorry. I know we have a lot of questions to go through, but that's it's so true. Anyway,
you can feel free to go down the rabbit hole. We can we can do anything. But I think in this vein, I think another thing that people were asking for, and that would be interesting to hear from you, is given that there are such benefits for every runner, what sort of lists of exercises do you recommend for healthy runners? So this is assuming that there's not a specific condition or history of injuries or whatever. This is just the list of exercises that you recommend that people do for the benefits that you get from movement.
Again,
strength training.
I'm going to reiterate this again because I think it's so important. Whatever exercises you can continue doing consistently are going to be the best for you. But I'll bite because I know what you want to hear. So, ultimately, we want to break down the different areas that are going to experience load when we're running as runners, right? So, obviously, running is not mainly upper body, like it is a lot more lower body. So we're going to stick to, not that upper body is not important, and I'll get to that in a second, but when we're thinking about the different areas of our body that are getting affected the most, we're thinking about the ankle, the hip, and the knee. So a lot of the exercises are going to revolve around that. So what are some of the exercises that hit those major muscles the most? But then also can sometimes become more running specific, or really allow your body to be taken through that same movement that you're going to be doing when you're running. You're basically practicing in a controlled manner when you're doing movement type of exercises. I don't even want to say strength training anymore, but when you're doing those exercises, you want to prep your body in that way, like what you're going to be asking it to do when you're running. So when we're talking about the big hip muscles, we have the quad, we have the glutes, and the hamstrings. So when we equate that to different exercises, we're really looking at things like squats and deadlifts, right? Really simple, really basic. You don't have to think much more than that. You don't have to overcomplicate it. When you're running, your knee bends a little bit, your hip bends a little bit. That's what you do when you're squatting. When you're doing a deadlift, you're hinging forward, you're really loading that posterior chain. Those are big powerhouse muscles that you use when you're running. You're just really trying to target the muscles that you're going to be using when you're running. So again, don't have to overcomplicate it. Really simple. So squats, deadlifts, 100%. Then we're talking about, foot and ankle, which I think a lot of runners do forget about. So I think a lot of like calf exercises, calf raises, and maybe some kind of like balance exercise that really allows you to work the smaller muscles in the foot. So we now have 3 exercises. I also think that some runners forget about plyometrics, which I think is a really big portion of it as well. But I don't necessarily see plyometrics in the same way. I think, again, plyometrics plays a big role in that word that I just used, which is control of your muscular system. I think when you really get down to it and you're able to work on that control in that way, I think that becomes really important and something that a lot of runners miss. So for example, when you're running, you're jumping, right, which is technically a plyometric, but running is a lot of, again, just kind of your body already knows what it's doing. You're not really thinking about push off and landing. So I think plyometrics becomes a really good way where you can start to think about, okay, how am I giving off power? How am I able to really turn this into a true strength exercise? And plyometrics can help you do that as well. Also huge in rehab. Core exercises, I guess, but if you're squatting and deadlifting already, you are in a upright position, working your core muscles. So, planks and side planks if you have the time for it. But again, most runners don't end up doing strength routines when they're like 10, 12 exercises long because it's just too much. It's too much to do. So I don't like to list like 1,200 exercises. I like to start with those basics. And then it's like, all right, continue and progress them, make them single leg. And then maybe add some upper body in there. So I could list maybe 100 more exercises. And if you don't even know what to do, look on my page because I post an exercise routine every single week if you're confused. But nail the basics down and then work from there is my belief.
That's huge. That's huge because I think I could have had, like you said, 100. I could have a bunch of extras. I could say, but what about this one? You're like, yeah, that's great too.
Right.
What about this one? Yeah, that's great too.
Yeah, like I could name like farmer's carry. I love that one because again, you're working on upright posture and stability. And it's like, I could name 100, but we're not, I know just for myself, like you, I don't love strength training. So I'm not going to be out there for an hour and a half trying to complete a list of 12 exercises. So if you're listening to this and you're like, where do I start? What can I possibly do? Start with 4, start with 5 exercises. Work on increasing the weight, work on progressing those a little bit. And then who knows, maybe you've developed a good routine from there and you start to enjoy it and you start to play around with variability. But got to start somewhere. So yeah,
that's huge. So now that we kind of have a list of some major exercises, this is kind of a natural flow. So this is Rachel Eigsey, and they're asking so you have these exercises, what's the minimum effective dose of strength training for runners? So
I love this question.
Minimum effective dose.
It depends on so many different things. It depends on how your body's responding to these exercises, what level you're at, I generally like to say, if you are just starting out and you're like, I want to do the bare minimum with strength training, because I understand its benefits, but I really don't enjoy it. I say, again, find 1 to 2 times per week for 20 to 30 minutes. That's it. Don't overthink it. I would say that's the bare minimum. of course, if we go down the road of like what is true strength training and how are we going to make a difference in the muscular system, I would bump that up to maybe 2 to 3 times a week. The timing doesn't really have to change, again, because as you're lifting heavier, reps and sets can go down. It won't take you, you don't have to do 100 sets of everything. But, I would just say about twice a week for 20 to 30 minutes, bare minimum. And I think that's doable for a lot of people. Set a timer, do it over your lunchtime, and just start to get into a routine with it. That's the most important part.
I like the idea of using time as well.
Yes.
Just because for myself, even when I was first starting to get into running, I felt like my calendar or my training plan was really intimidating. But if it's like, I only got to do this for 20 minutes, that feels so much better than thinking I got to go get all these certain exercises done. Yeah. That feels more intimidating than I'm going to set a timer for 20 minutes and just whatever I get done today. And I can always change it over time, but to get started, that seems so much more palpable.
Yeah.
Still have to get up when my alarm goes off.
And that's always the hardest part. But I also, sorry to interject here, I also, I think that's the biggest part that's missing. And I think that's also why I started my Instagram page, why I started the app that I have with all of the workouts and everything. It's like, most runners aren't even doing any strength training at all. So why are we making it so complicated and making people feel like, first of all, making them feel like they're doing something wrong if they're doing a certain exercise? Just get started. Don't overthink it and be consistent. And that's really what it's about.
Huge.
Yeah.
That's awesome. This next one is from Knock McLean. They're asking, how do you avoid overdoing strength and balancing it with your running routine?
I feel like we kind of touched on this already. I would say the best part is, probably modifying your run training as based on what your goals are with strength and vice versa. So it kind of ties into the periodization conversation we had. It's like, don't go all out on your strength and your run training at the exact same time. Work into the seasonal calendar of when you're going to focus on which one you're going to focus on. And then also, if you're adding a whole new routine or you're just starting out with the strength training, make sure you're not still increasing your run training. Just different things like that I would make note of. And also just recognizing again that you don't have to feel the same way you feel after your strength than you do with your running. And I think that's the best way to describe it.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
So this was another one that we had multiple people ask about. And this one is actually not on our list that we were going to go through. So sorry.
That's okay.
A little bit
No, you're fine.
But we obviously we're doctors of running and we talk about shoes a lot. And we did have a lot of people asking, they didn't ask, should I lift in my Alpha Flies, which that would be the appropriate question. Yes, you always, every activity in Alpha Flies, you'll be, 4 to 5% better. Just kidding. But a lot of the questions should I be lifting barefoot? Is that better?
Yeah.
Or what sort of shoes should I be lifting in? What's your take on that?
Safety first, always. So I don't think that for everyone, barefoot is necessarily the move, because I don't want you stepping in something and then injuring yourself because of that. Also, really terrified for someone to drop a weight on their toes and they're barefoot. That's really scary. However, I actually do strength train barefoot. I don't necessarily want to sit here and be like, I'm on a high horse, I strength train barefoot and that makes me stronger than everyone. Absolutely not. That's literally not it at all. I think there are, some potential benefits to strength training barefoot, which is just, again, working the foot muscles a little bit more. And I think as runners, we can be just more aware of how much the foot and ankle comes into play, and the stability of those muscles is important. So yes, if you can do it safely, it's good to strength train barefoot or in a more minimalist shoe. The more cushioning, the more foam, all of that is just going to make your foot a little bit more unstable, or just generally shift you in different positions that may change the way that you're moving. But at the end of the day, look, I've gone to the gym in my running shoes and lifted in my running shoes because I had nothing else to do. I'm not going to be like, yeah, I'm hiking home now. I'm going to skip my whole strength workout because I don't have the right shoes. Like, I don't think we have to overthink it that much, to be completely honest.
Right.
But if you have the option, choose a shoe that's a little bit more natural, I would say, like a little bit more minimalist. Yeah.
Yeah. Makes a lot of sense. Because if your goal is to lift, especially if you're lifting heavy, if the goal is to lift heavy, you want a platform that allows you to do that, not to do other things. So
Exactly. And again, it's not like anything's wrong. Like, if you really want to lift in your alpha flies, like, by all means, if that's what's going to get you to lift, I'm good with it. Trust me, I'm good with it. And maybe you'll even feel more stable when you're running in them. I don't know. So these conversations, I feel like I always get in trouble for, because then people are like, well, you say that's wrong to do. And it's like, that's absolutely not what I'm saying. Like, you know what I mean? But I'm just saying, like, here, if you tried it this way, it could mean this, but like, whatever works for you.
Right. Totally.
Yeah.
So here's our last strength training related question that I want to ask you tonight. And I think this is a great question. And the person was asking, is strength training bad for your running performance? They seem a little bit contradictory, lifting heavy, doing a running exercise. So what do you think about that?
I'm going to answer this in a way that you probably didn't expect me to answer it. It can be, if you are allowing it to negatively affect your running performance, meaning you are going too hard in your strength training, not leaving enough time for recovery, doing a really hard run. Yeah, it can absolutely negatively affect your running performance. And that, again, goes back to our conversation of periodization, making sure that you are consciously making those decisions of when you're going to be strength training, what that looks like based on your running goals. If you are making the right choices with that, strength training can be very beneficial for you. But if you flip it and you're like, you don't leave enough time for recovery for your muscular system, you're pushing it too hard with your strength training and your run training at the same time, then yes, it can negatively affect performance for sure.
That's super interesting, because I love the way you're answering that, because you're kind of saying it's not the muscular and tendinous changes that happen because of strength training that make your performance worse. Actually, those help your performance. What hurts your performance is when you do it wrong. If you don't allow adequate recovery and you're trying to do everything all at once.
I think what people forget is it's not just the work that we put in that makes progress. It's the work plus the recovery that equals progress. You can't just work and expect your body to just continue improving. That's when we come in. That's when we see injuries happen, when you're not taking enough of that rest and recovery time. So I think that's a really important part of all of it: strength training, run training, and balancing both of them. But even if you're just doing one of them. So yeah, that's like the most important part of it all.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
Okay, so you're obviously on the Doc's Running podcast, and people ask us about shoes all the time, and we obviously write about shoes. So we have to ask you, but you recently ran Chicago Marathon. Maybe one question is, what did you run that marathon in, and what are your favorite running shoes? We just want to hear from you on that.
Disclaimer, I am an ambassador for Newton running shoes. So I ran the race in Newton running, the Fate 9s, I believe. Maybe I'm forgetting now because it has been over a month since Chicago. I have so many different pairs of Newtons because, and even before I became an ambassador, I think I became an ambassador just because I was tagging them constantly in my Instagram posts. Like, I just have loved them for so long. I love Newton because they work for me and they feel best for me. I think that a running shoe is an individual person's journey, and we're 100%. All different, and the way we train is different. The way we live is different. We're all built differently. I find that I have had my least amount of injuries, and I've just felt my best running in Newtons. So I'm very happy to be an ambassador, and that means that I only run in Newtons, like all different pairs. So they're my favorites.
That makes a lot of sense. That's great. We're fans of what they do over at Newton too. I think especially the Newton Fit is so good. Their uppers
Yes.
are really, really well done.
Yes.
And they're starting to offer different options that are accessible to more runners. Like the
Totally.
Fate, I think, has always been like their go-to, like step into the brand and try it out model.
Yeah.
And now they have the Isaac that just came out, which is
Yes.
even easier to step into. And
Yeah.
so, it's a
Also,
and their sustainability work is probably the top
part.
of any company right now.
That's the best part, and I'm really very conscious when I work with brands, and I do my best to work with brands that I feel like align with my values, and I think that's a huge part of it as well. Also, they're coming out with a carbon-plated shoe later this year, so that's going to be interesting.
Heck yeah.
Yeah, we'll
cool.
see. I'm interested. I generally don't love carbon-plated shoes. I haven't had good experiences. But I don't know. I love everything they do, so I'm very curious to
get to try it out at least.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, that's exciting.
Yeah.
Cool. Awesome.
Yeah.
And so I think the last thing before we wrap up, can you just kind of let everybody know how they could find you and what places they could go to see the work that you're doing?
Yeah, so mainly on Instagram at Train Smart Run Strong. My website's also trainsmartrunstrong.com. And I am on TikTok, Train Smart Run Strong as well on there. I love TikTok. I don't have as big as an account on TikTok as I do on Instagram, but I feel like I post the little things on there too more just because it doesn't feel as serious to me, weirdly. So yeah, follow me on both of those. Yeah.
Great. Fantastic. Well, thank you again for joining us. I think it's fun to hear from somebody who is practically working with runners all the time on this topic. And so what I love about the way that you approach these answers are very much with the practical in mind and trying to help people just establish habits and avoid pitfalls and just make it easy. So thank you so much for sharing your expertise. Go on and check out Victoria's stuff wherever you can find her on Instagram, obviously the TikTok to get those little extra nuggets, and the website. And again, thank you so much for joining. And we look forward to talking to everybody next time.
Thank you, Nathan.